We come to our class meditation here in the chapel on Sunrise Ranch on April 27th, 1954. And in the current of the Spirit, we say, Happy birthday, Martin. We've been considering various aspects of the matter of design in relationship to these basic principles of being. And this morning, I would like, with your cooperation, to consider some of the basic aspects of this problem, or question, subject. It's all three, as far as we're concerned. But if we are going to take up this aspect of the problem this morning, it means that there must be a purity of heart that permits us to examine factors which, from a world standpoint, either cannot be touched or can be touched only lightly or extremely carefully. It should be carefully, in any case. But this particular phase of the question relates to what is commonly called sex. It's a subject that I always approach with a great deal of caution and care, because it's one about which there is so much misunderstanding, and with respect to which heart and mind tends to be veiled in so many people. But if we are going to comprehend the factors for ourselves, and in a manner which will permit us to serve others in the days to come, we need to consider this phase of the subject. When we approach a consideration of what may, in a certain sense at least, be called sex, we need to remember that we are touching into the field of that which is most holy, most sacred. And if it is holy and sacred, it means that it is closely centered in God. Now, when I use the word sex, I mean more than the physical characteristics which distinguish male and female. We recognize that sex must include sex function. But if I use that term, sex function, there tends to be a limitation in consciousness which causes the hearer to think of simply the physical relationship in the intimate sense between the male and the female. My concern in this hour is first to show you that the subject is not to be so contained, that it reaches into all fields of life expression. Conceivably, we might undertake to develop some other term, to use some other word. But if that idea presents itself, I ask the question, why? Why cannot we take the word, which is so misunderstood and misused and abused in idea and in function in the world, and see it in its true sense, its holy, sacred meaning, its broad expanse? See it in its relationship to God. We have spoken of God principle, or the principle which expresses the nature or the being of God. Now, if we have principle or God principle, what one word would tend to best suggest, not to define and confine, but to best suggest the nature of this God principle? Suppose we put there the word creative. The God principle is creative. This God principle, with its creative nature, extended into the physical realm of human beings, manifests in relationship to sex. It centers there, in actual fact. We see it, this creative function, in relationship to the process by which human beings are born. Conception, gestation, and birth. We see it in relationship to those factors which establish the pattern of relationship between male and female. Now we know that in certain cases where unwise function persists in the world pattern, human beings are sometimes, in their male and female aspects, drawn together on what is commonly called a physical basis. That is to say, the attraction that is felt is not so much an attraction of the mind or the heart. It is not so much a matter of love. It's a matter of the physical attraction, which is sometimes classified as a chemical affinity. Now, such function at that level, where there is not coordination mentally, emotionally, spiritually, soon burns itself out, soon ceases to have meaning. And that which at the first attracted begins on one side or the other, or on both sides, to repel. The physical is a vitally important aspect of being, and without the physical, being at this level, in this range of creation, has no meaning at all. So we cannot object to the physical, and that which is of God is supposed to manifest in the level of the physical, according to the pattern of the divine design. But if we consider principle in the creative sense, first, we need to see the truth that makes human beings free. The very manner in which I approach this subject suggests that it is in a range in which human beings are not free. It's a subject which, to a high degree, in the world sense, is utterly taboo. It's a subject which many people like to try to act and speak as if the subject didn't exist. It just isn't. And yet, we all know it is. And trying to do as the foolish ostrich does, according to some stories at least. Some say the ostrich doesn't do it, but some say it buries its head in the sand when it begins to be too tired, running away from horsemen, for instance, trying to escape, running for hours and becomes tired. And finally, according to the story, if it gets too weary and overcome with a sense of futility that its little brain can't cope with, it buries its head in the sand and imagines because it can't see the pursuing horseman, the horseman can't see it. And then, according to the story, they catch the big bird that can't fly. Now, of course, whether the story is true or not is beside the point. There's no use in our hiding our heads in the sand of time, the sands of time. And we can immediately see, whether we understand how it is or not, what the processes of relationship are, or understand the basic factors as they find expression in our lives in 1,000 different ways. We can readily understand in the overall sense that God principle in creative expression must be present in order for the reality of conception and birth to be possible. And that manifestation of principle in the physical sense is the means by which we all arrived in this sphere of things, whether we are willing to consider the subject or not. For every person on the face of the earth was born after conception and gestation had worked out. So, this creative expression of basic principle manifests in the physical level. The fact that human beings generally do not have an understanding of this manifestation of God principle in themselves accounts for a very high degree of the disorders, high degree of the number of disorders which beset human beings, physically, mentally, and emotionally. There are many who are ill, sick, physically, mentally, and emotionally, any one of the three dominant, where the basic difficulty arises as a result of maladjustment in relationship to the creative principle of God being as it manifests through the physical level of being. And we cannot hope to clearly understand those to whom we minister unless we examine into this phase of what may well be called a very delicate subject. In that ministry, in the days to come, you may see instance after instance where you know that the basic trouble is a distortion in the consciousness and emotional nature of the individual whom you are serving. You may know that, and you may not be able to say anything directly on the subject. At least, not at first. There isn't any subject which must be more cautiously approached, more carefully dealt with, because almost invariably, if the subject is touched upon at all, your hearer or hearers will develop some false ideas with respect to what you mean. And if this class here, since I have approached the subject, if the members of this class here do not develop any false concepts or ideas with respect to what I am presenting, if no one here distorts it, or spoils it, or jumps to any false conclusions, it will be the first time in my experience that such a thing has ever been. It will be the first time in my experience. And yet, if I am to fulfill my responsibility to you as a teacher, I cannot avoid the subject. Sooner or later, I must touch upon it. So, I do my best to help you attain a state of consciousness which will permit you to see it correctly in its true light, in its spiritual beauty, in its wonder and its glory. So that as nearly as possible, we can segregate your pattern of consciousness in regard to this subject from that which is ugly, sordid, unreal, or in any way should not be. In our recent services, you here sharing with our unit as a whole have allowed the development of, a higher degree of the level of unification of consciousness. Have you not felt it in connection with our services? Something that was of peace, something that was real in the spiritual pattern of being. Now, that atmosphere is absolutely essential to any true understanding of this subject. And if in the days to come you have someone coming to you for assistance in the way of life, and that individual has a basic problem which you know, and you should be able to know what the factors are, which you know rests in this field, and you, just because you know it, say, well, now here, your problem is a maladjustment in the field of sex. We'll have to get into that. How far do you think you'll get? You would just block the thing like that. You can't do it. Unless you can encourage that individual, assist in various ways, use the indirect approach, keep that person growing until he or she begins to sense something of the spiritual level of being and to accept your leadership in relationship to that, you had better leave the subject alone. Because you can be filled with good intentions and, in fact, offering something of great value. But if you have not prepared the consciousness of your hearer or hearers to a point where there is the ability to receive, then that which you offer will be misunderstood. Ideas will spring up, some of which might amaze you. I have seen some spring up from the consciousness of those whom I have sought to serve, even watching all of these things, and being as careful as possible under the circumstances. I've known some ideas to spring up that were, certainly a far cry from anything that I would even recognize. But in service, after using reasonable precaution, being wise, we still have to take a chance, so to speak. We still have to dare to do. We still have to move forward. We cannot say, well, here's an opportunity, but there's a chance I'll be misunderstood if I do that. I'd better just not do anything. First thing you know, you won't be doing anything except going down. But we must be wise and have understanding. Be careful to establish a pattern of consciousness which permits the development of understanding, and then proceed in the current of the Spirit. So, that is my attitude towards you, and I feel that in our togetherness thus far, we have reached a point where we can begin at least to touch upon this subject. It is not one which we can explore in fullness in a class period or two. There is so much involved which as yet you can not possibly see, that we will probably be touching the subject from time to time in various ways through the remaining portion of our class term. And the more you understand about it, the more you will realize there is to understand about it. And I hope no one here imagines that he or she understands all that is necessary. That is one of the most, what shall we say, devastating of human attitudes. And it's one you will run into in the days to come, because people, particularly the male aspect of the human expression. Some women are like that too. But the men are the greatest are more greatly at fault, I'll put it that way, are more greatly at fault in this than the women. Because somehow or other, the male egotism with respect to his own concept of his own manhood tends to make the male feel that somehow or other he knows just about all that he needs to know on the subject, and he tends to close the door to the development of any real consciousness in this sphere. And that is one of the particularized problems that you will run into in the days to come. So, let us not have any closed doors. Now we recognize that if we are going to consider sex in the physical sense, we must also consider sex in every sense. Because if sex permits the manifestation of the creative principle in the physical level, isn't it rather, what should we say, inane to say the least, to imagine that the manifestation of creative principle at some other level is unrelated to sex? If sex permits the manifestation of creative principle in the physical level, sex permits the manifestation of creative principle in any level, in God Himself. We need to see that absolutely everything, and now I'm not attempting to to promulgate Freudian theories. But absolutely everything, at every level, has a relationship to sex. Just as it is utterly impossible for you to have been born on earth without sex, just so is it utterly impossible for anything to manifest anywhere, in any level, in heaven above or on earth beneath, without sex. There is no place in all the cosmos, in God or any of His creation, with respect to anything that has been brought forth or will be, but what it relates to, that which is signified when we use the word sex. Every level of being, everything. Man has somehow established ideas with respect to sex in the physical sense, built a barrier around it, and tried to imagine that everything else is somehow not sex. And that if one is of a pure mind or a pure heart, one would not ever see any sex or think of sex at any other level. And many people have so deluded themselves, and there are plenty of people in the world to help them in the developing the delusion, that they imagine that somehow this sex thing, as they think of it in its confined area in the physical realm, is sinful. There are those who imagine that the fall of man was because Adam and Eve, created by God, male and female, finally discovered that they were male and female and functioned physically on the basis of sex. And forthwith, there was the fall. It was sinful. And yet God commanded them to, that one commandment that God gave, if all the rest of the commandments had been kept by mankind as faithfully as man has kept that one, we would have paradise on earth right now. He commanded man to multiply and replenish the earth. Man has. He's done plenty of multiplying, but what? It depends on what you're multiplying, doesn't it? As to what the result will be. Not just multiplying. But God did command man to multiply and replenish the earth. And man has certainly obeyed that commandment, though he has so fully ignored most of the others. But this idea that sex is somehow sinful originates from what? There's been a tendency on the part of human beings to have a little vision with respect to the truths of being. And because there was a recognition that this that was called sex, if it be misused, if it be abused, it will produce wrong things. Human beings have been carried to the lowest depths of degradation by wrong function in relationship to sex. On the other hand, if we stop to consider the principle, if there is that which in wrong use will carry to the lowest depths of which man is aware, is it difficult to comprehend the idea that this same thing, if it be used correctly, will carry man to the highest heights of which he is aware? It is because it is delicate. It is because it is something sacred and holy that the devastating results of wrong function in relationship to it show up so quickly and are so severe. But when I suggest right use, immediately, that connects up in the processes of catenation in different minds on the basis of the personal idea of what is right use. And there are those who say it's the physical relationship of male and female should not be allowed to manifest except for the specific purposes of reproduction of the human race. And otherwise, a man and his wife should not know each other physically. Well, now, to some, that is right use. To me, it's nonsense. Why? Because the idea classifies us as animals. They say, well, I'm not going to be animalistic. But forthwith they classify themselves as animals. Because in the animal kingdom, the only sphere in which there is any truly creative expression is in reproduction. And these human beings, aping animals, are going to make themselves so animalistic that they refuse to function in sex except in relationship to reproduction of the race. That puts it on the basis where the human being is saying, I cannot function in the true creative expression of the God principle except on a physical level. It relates to the same old false pattern in consciousness which to the human mind has functioned in separating heaven and earth. We're going to have heaven up there and the earth over here. We'll get away from the earth as fast as we can and we'll get to heaven. They have not been able to see heaven and earth as one. They have not been able to recognize that heaven is on earth, whether it is allowed manifestation or not. That we do not have to go somewhere to find it. We need to realize that the activity, the function of the principle, the God principle in heaven, is on the basis of sex. Now, there are those who imagine in the world that once you get away from the earth and go to heaven, that there won't be any more sex. And that idea has, to a large degree, derived from a misunderstanding of what the Master said when he quoted the statement, for in heaven there's neither marrying nor giving in marriage. Man, not understanding heaven, not understanding the God principle, not understanding correct function in the creative sense, has imagined something then with respect to heaven in relationship to that statement, because they didn't know what the truth of the matter was. What is the truth of the matter? In heaven there is no marrying nor giving in marriage. No. Why? Because the beings there are eternal. Isn't that simple? The beings there are eternal. And the limited sphere of, or expanse of life on earth as man has known it, certainly, say, 50 years. Somebody had 50 years of married life, and they say, oh, that's a long time. That's such a long time. That marriage must have been made in heaven to be so good on earth. Did you ever hear that expression? Huh? But the Lord said, in heaven there's neither marrying nor giving in marriage. And yet they say this marriage must have been made in heaven. It's lasted so long. Isn't that logic? That marriage was made on earth. It may have revealed some of the heavenly aspects of being. But the pattern of relationship of God beings was established a long time ago. That's something that, shall we say, millions of years? Would that make it any easier? Or hundreds of thousands of years or something? And we think that a little pattern of 25 or 30 or 50 years is going to upset all of that and change it around? No, it won't. Not at all. No, there isn't any marrying or giving in marriage in heaven because there isn't any need of it. But that isn't to say there isn't any sex function in heaven. Because there is no level of being where there is no sex function. In relationship to the form of that level, in relationship to the mental and emotional aspects of that level of being. There is no level anywhere where there is being where there is no sex function. So, this that we call sex, particularly and generally in reference to the physical factors, in actual truth, extends into every level of being. And remember that just as man cannot produce a baby without cooperating with the physical factors of sex, just so God cannot produce anything in creation without the factors of sex. Every creative act of God, bringing forth the earth or the solar system or anything upon the earth, or the creation of man himself, anything that was created at any time, in any place, in any level of being, was brought forth on the basis of sex. The creative God principle in action. And that creative God principle had to have a means of manifestation on the level where the creation was to take place. Now remember that. That is a key point which most people tend to overlook. This creative God principle must have a means of manifestation on the level on which the creation is to take place. We're going to have the creation of a baby, the bringing forth of a child. Then there must be the physical means at this level by reason of which that creative God principle may come into action. Just so there must be the means by which that principle may come into action on the mental level, the emotional level, and upon every level of being in heaven above or in the earth beneath. Why is it then that sex is such a holy, sacred thing? Because it is the central pattern of human relationship to God himself. There is nothing in which any human being can have any experience which allows a closer realization of actual sharing with God than this. Now, don't jump to a conclusion, somebody, as I have had people do before, that means that we must go out and somehow have physical sex relationships. I do not mean that at all. And some have said, well, I'm not married, then I must get married or I can't make any progress. And I don't mean that at all. And I certainly don't mean anything promiscuous or wrong. I don't mean that anyone not being married should suddenly try to get married? No. At that point, the human mind tends to jump in 1,000 different directions. Just like I might have a whole corral full of kangaroos and knock the fence down all at once. And there they go in absolutely every direction. No. Let's find out what it means and not jump to some foolish conclusion. Sex is the means by which the creative God principle acts in any level of being for all purposes in the fulfillment of God's will. And here we have that by means of which we can become aware of the actual reality of a close relationship with God. Because if that principle is inherent in our own beings, and that principle is inherent in God's being, we can perceive the relationship. And it is something with respect to which there is feeling. So, if you were to say, God has eyes and I have eyes, therefore I have a relationship with God, I have a deep realization of my close affinity with God. God has eyes and I have eyes. Well, that might be part of it. But in actual fact, if you say that over and over to yourself, do you think it will get you anywhere? I don't. Hands, ears, what have you. Mind, yes, God has mind. God has a heart of feeling. God's heart of love. Getting closer. Getting closer. But love, in order to have meaning and in order to be felt, must move. It must act. It can't be held static. Something must move. And the means by which God's principle can act creatively is, if we understand the meaning correctly, as I am using it, sex. Here we have something which in its very nature is so holy, is so sacred and divine, that if we study it, examine it with a pure heart, we begin to see something of the true nature of God, the being of God, the action of God. Not just the fact of God, but the fact of God in action. And it's God in action that is going to have meaning, not just the fact of His presence. And just the fact of being all by itself is not going to have meaning in relationship to ourselves. It is our being in action, in function, accomplishing something, doing something, that really gives us a sense of personal meaningfulness. Now, let us remember that sex function is not in any sense limited to the physical aspect of being. These principles are at work here in relationship to my appearing before you, or my presence here would be of no value to you, and your presence here would be of no value to me. We would be accomplishing nothing if there was not an interchange in the vibratory pattern of being, the creative expression of the God principle. And if in any moment any of you close off your heart of response, stop yielding, set up a pattern of resistance, you do not receive what I have to offer. Sex again. On that level. And in that interchange, if it is completely mutual, we have a deep inner satisfaction, a deep sense of accomplishing something, of movement, of the fact that in our relationship there is creative meaning. And so, it is in this that we can begin to have an awareness of how to truly participate with God in creative action on earth. And it is here that such function is so greatly needed. Now, I would like to draw your attention very briefly to something. We have talked about the core of being. And we have illustrated that core with a little circle, with a larger circle drawn around it. We have indicated this centering as the core of being, and the outer circle round about it as the periphery of life action. There we have a simple diagram illustrating the basic factors in relationship to practically every phase of life. All of the things that manifest out here in the periphery. And there we have a picture of the relationship of God and the human being, the core of being, deity. We have a portrayal on the basis of the male and female principle. The male principle and the female principle. And the action of the male principle in relationship to the female principle causes something to be born at the periphery of life. The birth of a child. The coming forth of all those things that make life meaningful. You cannot consider God at any level of being which we can comprehend. We cannot consider the creative principles without considering the male and the female principles. And they work at all levels, at all times, on the basis of conception, gestation, and birth. And if you ignore that principle in relationship to anything that is coming forth, at any level, something is going to go wrong with it. It will not manifest the way it is supposed to. There must be, for the manifestation of anything, anywhere, good, bad, or indifferent, there is always the interplay of the male and the female principle. And always whatever manifests after conception, gestation, and birth. Now it may be stillbirth, it may be abortion, it may be something wrong, or it may be a live birth of a perfectly beautiful, healthy child. Whatever it is appearing at the periphery of being, and everything that so manifests on earth and in heaven above manifests through the female principle, without any exception, anywhere at any time, in God, in any heaven that there is, and here on earth. Everything that manifests in form, according to the level of form, whatever it may be, manifests through the female principle. Perhaps that would be a good point.